Welcome to the OphthoSim software tour, and thank you for purchasing our products. On the desktop here, I've loaded the OphthoSim software package, and if you purchase the Educator's Toolkit, which we may discuss on a future video, then you would receive these three shortcut packages as well in order to allow the instructor to create their own images, annotate their own images, and create their own presentations for distribution to their students that are participating in the simulation exercises. So we're going to start the program now, and this is the first screen that you will see, and I'll go through this in more detail, but you'll see in the middle of the welcome screen the Start OphthoSim software button, and you'll see a Group Connect button. So if you purchase the Educator's Toolkit and are going to teach online to remote locations through a virtual private network, then this computer would automatically search for that connection and connect to it if you've engaged that particular software package. Before we get started, we're going to discuss the icons that you're going to see on the screen, and we'll introduce those one at a time as we get to them when we go through the software tour. So the first one is the bottom left. You'll see the monitors here read 0. That means that there's no devices attached to the computer. So if you have the base unit, now's the time to plug it in. And if we plug it in, we will see in a minute that the computer will detect, the software package will detect the external monitor or the base unit, and it now reads 1. So that now means that we have communication between the software and the OphthoSim base unit. The next thing we'll do is we'll plug in the USB sensor box after you assure that the instrumented handle with its supplied cable is connected properly to the sensor box. Then we'll plug in the other supplied cable to another free USB port on the computer. So I'll plug that in now, and I want you to pay particular attention to this waiting connect button. This is now searching for that device, and when it communicates properly with that device, it should now convert to the OphthoSim peripheral version 3.0. So that now that little icon and words now tell me that the program is now communicating with the instrumented scope and the sensor box, and we have one base unit connected. So now we're ready to engage in the program. So if I start the program, you will now get our splash screen or main menu screen, which should look like this. And the program is designed so that you would go through it as a student from the introduction all the way down to self-examination. But we'll go through these in more detail as we discuss the software package itself. There is a search portion that allows you to do a quick search on a certain condition and get to that section quickly. Let's explain the menu buttons on the top first. Some of these are functional, and some of them relate to another software package in OtoSim, which you may have purchased as well for the ear exam. Some of them are functional, but some of them may not be. So we'll go through these one at a time. The File button is just an exit button to exit the program. The Voice button is not active for OphthoSim. It's only active for the OtoSim package software. Language, you have 3 options of languages: English, Chinese, and Japanese. In this case, we're going to select the English language. Text size, we can increase the font size if we would desire to do that on the main screen. Tools, this is a very important function. The Calibrate button is extremely important because this allows us to calibrate the instrumented handle with the software package, and we'll discuss that when we get to that section. This you don't really need. That's for our company tech support line only. The View button allows you to use the viewfinder or the targeting mechanism either as a full screen crosshairs, a small crosshairs, or the classic arrow, or you can turn it off. The default is the large full screen crosshairs viewfinder. The help button just allows you to look at the version of the program that you're currently loaded and the developers. And also in the help button, there is a help contents, which goes through the program itself, a manual, online manual, so to speak. So you can go through each of these different areas and read about them if you're having any issues with the use of the actual program itself. Okay, so now we'll enter the program itself. The first section is the introduction. And if I click on that, it opens up the drop-down list of the contents within that introduction. So there's a welcome, the history of ophthalmoscopy, and normal anatomy of the ocular fundus, and examination principles and technique. And as I click each one of these and view them and read them, after I'm finished with them, the contents will turn red. So when I go back to the screen, I can see which ones I've actually looked at for future reference. And we're not going to go through these in a lot of detail, but certainly feel welcome to go through them at your own leisure. An important part of the program is obviously checking the user's vision. So in this particular section, we check acuity, color, for red-green color blindness, shape identification, depth perception, and interposition. So if we start with acuity, which is obviously the most important test, and the viewer would look down through the ophthalmoscope, focused properly, and they should be seeing this Snellen's eye chart, and they should be able to read down to the 5 or 6 line level. If they can't, then we would suggest that they be seen by an optometrist or an ophthalmologist to correct their acuity. Okay, so, and once you're finished with a certain screen, you can press the Done button, and it returns you back to the main menu. And you can see now we viewed acuity already, and then we can go into one of the other sections. So color, if you're red-green colorblind, you would not be able to make out the number 74 that's on this particular image, and that has to be obviously looked into by your specialist in order to do some corrective techniques to try to overcome your red-green color blindness. We check for shape identification, just again to be able to allow you to use the scope and identify common shapes within the simulator. So in this particular case, you have a box. Okay, depth perception, very important. Even though you're looking at a flat image here, the central nervous system will allow you to create a three-dimensional structure out of a two-dimensional structure here. As you see on the left bank of circles here, these are spheres, and the light is coming from the top, and these under normal circumstances would appear as convex or planets to the average user, and the bank on the right would appear as craters, since the light is coming from the lower is lit on the lower part of the circle. So this gives you a three-dimensional view, even though you're seeing a two-dimensional structure. Interposition, same things apply. If one thing overlaps another, it gives you the impression that it's closer to the viewer. So in this case, the blue circle overlaps the red, so it appears in the foreground in front of the red circle. Okay, instrument use. This is an important section. In order to use the software correctly, the user must be able to use the instrumented scope. So in this particular section, we discuss how that is practiced and perfected prior to going on to the rest of the program. So in this particular situation, we have different skill levels. We'll select skill level number 1. And now what you'll see appear is the instrumented scopes input to the software package. So you will see a blue rectangle, and you'll see a green full screen hatch marks or targeting mechanism. What's important to note here is when I'm looking at the computer screen, this shows me a bigger retinal image, but what the actual user is seeing inside the using the instrumented scope in the simulator is actually they're only going to see what's in this blue box or rectangle in order to simulate the view that one would get with direct ophthalmoscopy. So, and as I move the handle around, you'll see that the box moves with the movement of the handle in the up, down, right, or left position. And if I'm looking at the optic nerve, for example, what they're going to be seeing is only within this box here. They would not see what's out here. Okay, so that's how that works. And I'm going to put this thing back on the base again, because this is where important where you need to do the calibration button. Okay, so on the tools up here, we have to calibrate the instrument. So it's easy to calibrate. You click on the calibrate button. This photo comes up, this picture, and the instrumented scope has a magnet on it. So you position the scope in the position that you see on the base unit here, and then you simply calibrate the unit. Calibration is completed, and you'll see what happens is now the box and the hash marks are directly in the center of the visual field of the screen and in the unit itself in the simulator. So now what you see on this testing section is that you'll see red dots. So what the user has to do is they have to use the instrumented scope to follow the red dots into the blue circle, and once they get inside the blue circle, they hover inside the circle for a given amount of fixed time, then the circle will show that you've hit the target and move to another one. You notice on the top right of the screen you have a timer. The timer does not start until the first target is hit. And there's a very important highlighted requirement here that the user must have the scope in the vertical position in order to make this thing work properly. So they have to get used to using the scope in a vertical or near vertical position. So if I pick up the scope now and I'm looking inside the unit, and as the instructor looks at the main screen, they can see what the student is looking at. What they're looking at is what's in the blue rectangle, and then they follow that red dotted line up to the first target, and now they're in it, and it turns green because they've hit the target, and you can see the clock, the timer now starts. Another red dotted circle appears, and they maneuver down to that one, and then they maneuver to the next one. Remember, they're looking down into the simulator as they're doing this, but the instructor can watch what they're doing on the main screen as we're seeing in the picture here. And then they go down to the final target, and once they hit the final target, the timer stops, the image freezes, and you can see their time given here. Okay, so that is that one. And you can retake the test if you want with the bottom right button, or you can get back to the main menu by pressing the done button. You could also practice a left and right eye. So if you want to switch to the left eye, so now we've switched, and you can toggle this thing back and forth to practice on either eye. Okay, so we're going to click out of that section. So now we're going back to the main menu. So it goes through different skill levels and to the order of examination, which is worth covering in this short video. So if you click on the order of examination, this is the order of examination that's recommended by most ophthalmologists in order to have a thorough examination of the retina. So because we know that the fovea is a very sensitive part of the retina with bright light on it, we would avoid that area till the end of the examination. So the order of the examination is we start with the optic nerve. So the user would go into the optic nerve and look at that, and then they would head, once they complete that section, they would head up to the lateral temporal area and look around. And then they would head to the superior nasal area, and then to the inferior nasal area, and then to the lateral inferior area, and then finally up to the fovea. And then once they're done, again, the timer stops and they're complete. So I would suggest that the user become very familiar with that section and get a very thorough technique so they don't miss anything during the clinical exam of their patient. Okay, so we'll get out of this section now, and we'll go into the next section, which will now teach us about different features of the eye. So in this particular section, we have broken it down into normal feature identification, where you have normal retina to identify the normal anatomical landmarks that are important for the clinical exam. And then we get you to recognize abnormal features, which are listed here in this drop-down list of certain features which are associated with pathological conditions. So this is an important section to be able to identify normal and abnormal. So if we start with the normal, here you can see on the top of the list here we have what we would consider the 5 most important things to look at in the eye anatomically. One is the optic nerve head. So you can see that the optic nerve head is identified on the main screen, and the student would have to navigate with using the instrumented scope to the optic nerve head and then look at it, and it turns green. So now I know that the student has hit it. And if the instructor wanted them to examine that area a little bit in more detail, then I can freeze the image. We'll look at this bank of buttons down at the bottom left. I can freeze the image, and now you see the instrumented handle is now frozen, and the image is frozen, and I can move it as the instructor. I can click on this button, the move button, and I can move the entire screen, the blue box or blue rectangle, to where I want the student to look. So if I want him to focus only on the optic nerve head, I would move the blue box or blue rectangle into that area, and now the instrumented scope is frozen, and the student would be looking inside, only seeing this area of the retina that my instructor wants me to focus on. And while I'm in that area, I can use my mouse to point around to different areas, or I can annotate with this circular annotation button. So I can use circles to show different areas, or I can use rectangular squares to show different areas, and then once I'm done, I can erase them. Or I can magnify certain areas. So I can take the magnifying button and magnify the optic nerve head, for example. And if I right-click on the mouse, I can select the level of magnification from the smallest to the largest. So if I use a large magnification, then I can really get a magnified view of that area. So it allows the user to really get a good magnified view of the area of interest. If I unfreeze the image, now the instrumented scope is back in action, so to speak, and I'm going to put it back on the base unit to center it again, and you can see that we go through the anatomical structures that are important for identification on a normal eye. So once we're done with that section, I can get out. Okay, and then we didn't complete the section, so you see that it didn't turn red. So it means that as a user, I have to go back in and complete all these different areas. But now we're going to go into pathology. So on the first one is AV nicking. So if I select AV nicking, what's now given in this example are 2 areas of the retina which show AV nicking. And that's, as you may know, is associated with an indicator for chronic hypertension. So the user would have to go up and identify those areas, and once they've seen them, they turn green. And if I go down to the other area, I find it, and as the instructor, I'm watching the student, so now I know that they've hit both of those targets. Okay? Or if they're having trouble with it, as I mentioned, I could freeze the whole thing, move and point to it, bring it up there, force them to go to that position, and actually point to it with my mouse, or I can annotate it with a circle. Okay, we can clear that away, release the freeze button, and we're complete that one. And because we've completed it, it turns red. So, and etc. I go through all the different pathological features for identification. So once I've done all that and learned that section well, then I'm ready for the main meat part of the program, which is in the pathology section. So if I expand the pathology section, you can see that we go through the majority of conditions that affect the retina, from normal, again reinforcing the normal exam, and then into the pathological conditions. And we're not going to go through these one at a time, but as an example, we can choose diabetic retinopathy, non-proliferative diabetic retinopathy. And this particular opening this menu now gives me several examples, in this case 13 examples of non-proliferative diabetic retinopathy. So and the user would be free to look and inspect all the different areas by moving the scope around. There's no targeting mechanism associated with this particular functionality. It's just a quick the user using it. But I can still do the other functionality and freeze it as the instructor, and I can point. I can move the box, and I can point to an area, for example, with a small retinal hemorrhage, or I can direct them to the top of the retina, showing them some exudative material. Okay, so that's what that functionality is all about. And I didn't explain this button down here. This is the intensity button. Okay, so for any image, I can turn the intensity up or down. The default is what the ophthalmologists feel is the most natural looking image, but feel free to use this button to brighten an image or to darken it to your liking. Okay, so once we're done that, we click the Done button. We haven't completed the section, but do you want to get out? Yes. So these examples you can go through obviously one at a time until you complete the whole section. Then once you've done the entire program, then the user, or at any time, the user can test their knowledge by using the self-examination button. Okay, so self-exam 1. Okay, so in this particular functionality, what happens here is that a user could take a quiz. Okay, so we can explain these buttons a little bit more detail. So the image will appear in the main screen, and on their unit, the choice of answers will appear on the right in this particular section. And once I start the quiz, then I would get a question that's going to appear here. So let's just try it. And in this particular scenario, there are 6 questions. And this is quiz number 1, and these are randomized. So if you take it repeatedly, you'll get a different quiz every time. So in this particular case, when I start the quiz, okay, so now an image will appear, a question would appear that the student would have to read, and then they have to look at the answers, and they have to make their selection. Remember, this is a quiz, but it is timed. You have 6 minutes and 42 seconds counting down. I could stop the timer at any time, which I can't do if this were a real exam. But for a quiz, I could stop the timer. I can now select a question. And if I get the wrong answer, it turns red. And I can go through these one at a time until I find the correct answer. Obviously, you wouldn't be able to do this on an exam. But on a quiz, this is for self-examination. You want to be able to get instant feedback on your answers, and this would tell you the question. Do you have a correct question? There's 6 questions, and you got 1 out of 6. And if I want to go back to any question, I can use this drop-down list to go to any question in this exam, and do the same thing. Find the correct answer. Obviously, now I got 2. When it's a quiz, because I can multiply select until I see the correct answer, I should automatically get perfect on every quiz that I do. Okay, and in order to force the student to use the ophthalmoscope rather than looking on the big screen, I can turn this screen off. So now that forces the student to look down into the unit to give their correct answer. So now that image that we just saw here is presented to the simulator, and the student would have to examine the image, looking around, and then select their answer. Okay? So that's about it. And then when you're done, you submit your answer, but it gives you an error that you didn't submit all the questions. Do you want to still exit? In this case, we'll say yes, and we're done. Okay, so that's a tour of that part. This latter part, the My Library section, is only for people that have purchased the Educator's Toolkit, where you can put your own content into the program, so you can have your own image library and create your own annotations and your own questions and to deliver to the program. So for this particular example here, we've put in only one image, so you can see that it'll outline where you have added content. You put contents into these categories as you use that particular software package on the Educator's Toolkit. In this case, this is a normal category, so then it gives you the image that you've imported. It gives you the anatomical knowledge that is necessary that goes with that slide. So in that particular program, you now can create different anatomical structures that you want to be able to test your students on. So for this particular example, the fovea is marked. The optic nerve is marked. And if I want to turn the screen on, I can turn the main screen on, and so in this case, select optic nerve. So now with my mouse, I have to find out where the optic nerve is. If I click anywhere, it doesn't engage, but if I click on the correct answer, it shows me the correct answer. Okay, and now it's asking me to do the fovea. The fovea is here, so if I click with my mouse, this is for main screen use only, as you can see here. Then I click on it, it gives me the correct answer. So once I've learned the anatomy, say on the main screen, now I can engage the simulator, and now when I look down with my scope, I can actually look for these particular structures. So in this case, I want to point to the fovea. So now I have to go to the fovea. I just hit it. It turns a check mark in here and automatically goes to the optic nerve. So if I now have to find the optic nerve, and I've hit the optic nerve, it now signifies that I've hit the correct answer. So that functionality is only available with the Educator's Toolkit. So that basically concludes the software tour of the OphthoSim program. And as mentioned, if you went through it from beginning to end, it certainly will improve your capabilities as a diagnostician for the direct eye examination and your understanding of pathological and normal conditions of the eye. So we hope you enjoy your software for many years to come and improve your patient outcomes. So thank you again for purchasing our products.